Either take the guest room or leave. That's what my mother said. Not in anger. Not in tears. Just calm, firm, final. Like someone closing a door they didn't plan to reopen. She didn't argue. She didn't shout. She simply walked away. And in that silence, her revenge began. It was 7:42 p.m. on a Tuesday. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon polish, the staircase banister gleaming under the chandelier light I'd chosen years ago. My mother stood at the bottom of the stairs, arms folded, her cardigan sleeves pushed to her elbows the way she always did when she'd made up her mind. The words didn't echo but they settled. Heavy. I stood halfway down the stairs, still holding the folded sweater I'd planned to bring down to the laundry. For a second, everything froze. The light hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the kitchen clock, even my breathing. Behind her, in the reflection of the hallway mirror, I caught my sister's face. She was leaning against the kitchen doorway, a mug in her hand and a smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. She'd been waiting for this moment. Maybe even planned it. I looked up at the chandelier. Every crystal dangling from it had passed through my hands. I'd spent weeks searching for an affordable set, found one in a dusty clearance aisle, and carefully installed it with the electrician. My name was on the receipt still tucked away in my file drawer upstairs. My fingerprints were all over this house, in ways they had long stopped noticing. My mother exhaled through her nose, like she expected me to argue. It's not meant to be harsh, she added, her voice softer now. But it's time things adjusted. Adjusted, I repeated, the word dry on my tongue. My sister finally stepped forward, the click of her heels sharp against the hardwood floor I'd refinished. Yeah. I've moved my things into the master bedroom, she said casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world. You'll be fine in the guest room. It's cozy. You don't mind, do you? The way she said it, you don't mind, wasn't a question. It was a declaration dressed in politeness. I let my gaze drift past her to the living room. A cardboard delivery box sat on the couch, my name crossed out in thick black marker, her name scribbled on top. A pair of brand new shoes sat neatly by the door, leather still stiff, price tag tucked inside. She'd already moved in, not just physically but mentally. She'd claimed the space like a conqueror stepping onto a newly captured land. I lowered my sweater slowly, folded it over my arm. I see, I said, keeping my voice even. That caught her off guard. She blinked, expecting a protest. My mother shifted uncomfortably, fiddling with the hem of her sleeve. You're not upset, are you? My sister added, feigning concern with a slight tilt of her head. Come on, Felicia. It's just a room. Just a room. She had no idea how much I'd given to keep that room standing. No idea that for every tile under her feet, every wall she leaned against, every light flicking above her head, I'd signed the checks. Quietly. Steadily. While she was busy flitting in and out of our lives, I'd stayed. Paid. Built. I didn't tell her that. Not yet. Instead, I slid my hands into my sweater pockets. My fingertips brushed against the folded envelope I'd tucked there earlier that day. A single document I'd needed for an unrelated errand. Or so I thought. At that moment it felt like holding a match near dry kindling. The clock in the living room struck 7:45. 3 slow chimes. My sister's smirk returned, thin and self-assured. She thought silence meant surrender. I walked the rest of the way down the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. The house was too still, as if it too was waiting for what I'd say. My mother's face softened when I reached the bottom. It's not personal, she murmured. Of course not, I said with a smile that wasn't really a smile. I moved past her into the living room. The muted television was flashing property value headlines across the bottom of the screen. Rising prices. Hot neighborhoods. This house wasn't just a home to them anymore. It was an asset. A prize. The kettle in the kitchen began to whistle softly. My sister set her mug down and reached for it before my mother could, pouring herself a cup as if she owned every item in the cabinets. Steam rose, fogging the edge of the window over the sink. Want some tea? She asked sweetly. No, I replied. She shrugged and turned her back. For just a second the overhead light flickered. Barely noticeable, but I saw the way her eyes darted up, unsure. She didn't know the electric bill was still in my name. She didn't know a lot of things. I walked toward the bookshelf, fingers tracing the edge of a photo frame. My sister and I years ago standing in front of this house with fresh paint and tired smiles. Back then she was visiting. I was holding everything together. Bitterness didn't flare like anger. It settled like a stone in my chest. Heavy. Permanent. My mother came around the corner holding her tea. "Felicia," she said gently, "don't make this harder than it needs to be." I turned to face her fully for the first time since she'd spoken. Her eyes had that pleading softness, the one that always appeared when she wanted me to be the reasonable one. I had played that role my entire life. Quiet. Reliable. The daughter who never caused scenes. For the first time I didn't rush to fill the silence. My sister leaned against the counter, arms folded, cup in hand, enjoying the show. Her confidence was so thick it was almost laughable. He thought this was checkmate. I stepped forward slowly, stopping just at the kitchen doorway where she stood. The steam from her cup curled between us like a thin fog. She raised an eyebrow, ready to gloat. "Enjoy the room," I said softly. She laughed, but there was a tiny hitch in it, the kind that happens when someone isn't entirely sure of their footing. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I answered. "Just enjoy it while you can." She tilted her head, trying to read me. For a split second the smugness cracked. "Not much. Just enough." I turned toward the stairs. "It's late," I said simply. "Felicia," my mother called after me, her voice uncertain now. "We'll talk in the morning, okay?" "Sure," I said without turning around. As I climbed the stairs I could feel their eyes on my back. My sister forced a laugh, louder this time, like she was trying to shake off whatever had unsettled her. My mother stayed quiet. Halfway up I paused, resting my hand on the railing. I looked down. My sister stood in the kitchen doorway, cup in hand, the chandelier light casting her shadow across the floor. My mother hovered behind her, wringing her fingers nervously. I didn't give them another word. I continued up, step by step, each one steady, deliberate. When I reached my room, I closed the door gently and locked it with a soft click that echoed down the hallway like a quiet line drawn in the sand. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I sat by the window watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. The night air was cool through the cracked pane, carrying the faint sound of a neighbor's TV. My mind wasn't replaying their words. It was already moving forward, connecting dots, recalling receipts, remembering details they'd long forgotten. They thought they'd cornered me. What they didn't know was that I built the walls around them. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window until the streetlights dimmed into early dawn, my cardigan wrapped around my shoulders, the house slowly stirring awake below me. The wooden floorboards creaked as my sister moved around the kitchen, humming off-key, completely unaware that while she was sipping her morning coffee, I was quietly drawing my own line in the sand. The click of the hallway light snapped me out of my thoughts. 5:47 a.m. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but a pale blue light seeped through the curtains, washing the room in soft gray. I stood, stretched my stiff legs and walked toward the closet. The air was cool and sharp that morning. It matched my mood perfectly. There was no grand confrontation coming. Not yet. Leaving wasn't surrender. It was the opening move. I pulled out 2 suitcases, old, sturdy ones I'd kept from my teaching days. They rolled across the floor with a quiet, purposeful sound. I folded my clothes neatly, piece by piece. Not rushed. Not panicked. This wasn't a frantic escape in the middle of the night. This was strategic. Deliberate. Every sweater folded was a quiet statement. I'm done playing by your rules. I didn't pack everything. Just what I needed. A few clothes, my personal documents, a couple of sentimental items, and most importantly, the locked black box from the bottom shelf of my closet. It was heavier than it looked. Inside were carefully organized folders, receipts, loan agreements, contractor invoices, property tax slips. A paper trail spanning over 15 years. My sister had her decorations. I had proof. The house was unusually quiet. I could hear the faint gurgle of the coffee maker downstairs and my sister's slippered feet sliding across the kitchen tile. She had no idea that upstairs, the ground beneath her was already shifting. I zipped up the first suitcase just as my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from my neighbor Donna. "Morning. You're up early. Want me to pick up your paper today too?" I stared at the text for a second. Donna had lived across the street for 30 years. She saw everything. I typed back a short reply. "Yes, please. Thanks, Donna." I didn't explain. I didn't need to. Small things like that, the quiet logistics were what made plans work. By 6:30 a.m. the sky had brightened to a soft gold. I wheeled the suitcases into the hallway. The sound of rolling wheels echoed faintly, making my sister's voice float up from the kitchen. "Felicia? What's that noise?" I didn't answer. At the top of the stairs I paused. For a brief moment I looked back at the room, my room, where I'd spent years holding this house together. The faded curtains, the chipped wooden dresser, the framed photos on the wall. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a stage set, one I was quietly stepping away from so I could rewrite the script elsewhere. I took the suitcases downstairs, one step at a time, the sounds steady and unhurried. When I reached the bottom, my sister was waiting in the kitchen doorway, robe tied loosely around her waist, holding her mug like a prop. "Where are you going with those?" she asked, forcing a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. I set the suitcases by the door and met her gaze calmly. "Out." "Out?" she repeated as if the concept was foreign to her. You're not actually leaving, are you? Because of last night?" "Felicia, come on." Her tone was too casual, too dismissive, the kind people use when they think they've already won. I didn't rise to it. I simply reached for my coat hanging on the rack. "I'll be back later for the rest," I said. "The rest? What rest?" she asked quickly. I didn't answer. Her grip tightened slightly on the mug. She was trying to read me, to understand what I was doing, but my silence unnerved her more than any argument could. As I opened the door, the morning air rushed in, crisp, clean, carrying the faint smell of wet grass and newspaper ink. It felt good. Freeing. My sister called out something behind me, but the door clicked shut before her words reached me fully. The driveway was still damp with dew. I loaded the suitcases into the trunk of my car, my breath fogging in the cool air. As I turned the key in the ignition, I caught sight of the house in the rearview mirror. For years, it had been my responsibility, my burden, my investment. Now for the first time it felt like something separate. Something I could dismantle piece by piece without emotion clouding the work. I drove toward the small apartment complex I'd looked at weeks earlier. At the time I told myself I was just curious. Deep down I think I'd known this day was coming. The leasing office was quiet at that hour. A young man with tired eyes handed me the keys after a brief paperwork shuffle. I signed the lease without hesitation. It wasn't a forever home, it was a base of operations. The apartment smelled faintly of fresh paint and cleaning solution. Sunlight spilled through the blinds, creating striped patterns on the floor. It wasn't large, but it was mine, or at least free from their shadows. I placed the black box carefully in the hall closet, locking it with a small padlock. That box was more than paper. It was leverage. Around noon my phone rang. It was Mom. I let it buzz twice before picking up. "Felicia? Where are you?" Her voice was careful, not panicked. Yet. "I'm fine," I said evenly. "Just taking care of a few things." "You left with suitcases," she said. "Your sister's worried." I almost laughed. Worried wasn't the word. "I'll be back later," I repeated. "Felicia, you don't have to do this," she pressed. "You can stay. In the guest room. It's just temporary." I let the silence stretch, then said, "Temporary has a way of becoming permanent in this house." She hesitated. "We'll talk tonight, all right?" "Sure," I said, but there was no warmth in it. After hanging up, I sat at the small kitchen table in my new place, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. The quiet was different here. Not heavy. Not watchful. Just still. I opened the black box, laying the folders out one by one across the table. Property tax slips. Contractor receipts. Bank transfers. My name on every line that mattered. The smell of old paper filled the air, sharp and dry. I'd been too trusting, too quiet for too long. Every payment I made had been tucked away neatly, never flaunted, never weaponized, until now. I stacked everything in order, labeling them with sticky notes. When I reached the folder with the chandelier receipt, I paused, running my fingers over the faded ink. 15 years of investment. 15 years of holding it all together. The plan wasn't fully formed yet, but the pieces were all here. Leaving had cleared my head. Space does that. It turns confusion into clarity. Later that evening I drove back to the house. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink. My sister was outside, talking loudly on the phone, pacing the porch like she owned it. She froze when she saw my car pull in. "You're back," she said, tone edged with something between relief and suspicion. "I said I would be," I replied. She lowered her phone. "Look, about last night." "Not now," I said, breezing past her. My calmness made her uneasy. I could see it in the way her eyes narrowed, trying to figure out what I wasn't saying. Inside, Mom was setting the table for dinner. She looked up, cautious. "Felicia, can we just—" "Later," I said gently, grabbing a few more boxes from the hallway closet. I didn't stay to eat. I didn't explain. I left them standing in their own uncertainty. That night, in my new apartment, I tucked the last of my personal things into the closet and sat on the floor surrounded by the black box folders. My sister thought silence meant surrender. She had no idea silence was the sharpest tool I owned. I sat on the floor of my apartment that night, surrounded by open folders from the black box. The air smelled faintly of dust and paper glue, and the only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator in the corner. My hands moved automatically now, labeling, sorting, building a quiet fortress of proof. Outside, the city was winding down, cars passing in slow intervals, someone's TV muffled through the wall, but my mind was sharp, focused. I wasn't daydreaming about revenge. I was engineering it. The phone on the counter buzzed twice. My sister's name flashed across the screen, followed by Mom's. I let both calls go unanswered. The silence between us was starting to make them nervous. Good. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. My apartment still didn't feel like home, but it felt safe. The coffee pot sputtered to life, filling the small space with the smell of roasted beans. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and sat at the table with my notepad. No grand speeches. No emotional outbursts. Just dates, amounts, legal terms, and a growing list of contacts. By 8 a.m. I was ready. I drove to the law office downtown. Mr. Reynolds greeted me with his usual mild surprise, the kind that said most of his clients didn't show up with everything this organized. I laid the stack of folders on his desk. "I want to make it official," I said. He adjusted his glasses. "Official?" I leaned forward. "Ownership. Every dollar I put into that house is documented. I want it recognized. And if they don't cooperate, I want pressure. Quiet, legal pressure." His expression shifted. He wasn't surprised by my determination, just by how calmly I delivered it. "We can draft a demand letter," he said, flipping through the documents. "This is solid. Every receipt is in your name. You've kept everything." "Always," I said. The smell of fresh paper and office toner filled the room as his assistant started scanning the documents. I watched as each page disappeared into the machine, years of my quiet contributions becoming digital weapons. The letter would go out within 48 hours. Driving back, I passed my old street. Instinct made me slow down. The house was busy. A contractor's truck was parked in the driveway. 2 men carried rolls of carpet up the porch steps while my sister stood outside in leggings and sunglasses, pointing and giving directions as if she were the queen of the neighborhood. She didn't see my car. I stayed just long enough to watch her wave her hands like she owned every nail in that house. It almost made me laugh. She had no idea the countdown had already started. That evening, I sat by my apartment window, sipping tea as the last rays of sunlight stretched across the floor. The letter had been emailed to them that afternoon and sent by courier for good measure. Polite. Precise. No threats, no drama, just legal clarity. 14 days to respond. 2 days passed in silence. Then the cracks began to show. It started with a phone call from Mom mid-morning. Her voice was tight, clipped at the edges. "Felicia, did you do something?" I pretended not to understand. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. "Some letter came. From a law office." I let the pause stretch just enough. "Yes. It's from Mr. Reynolds. Everything is documented, Mom. I just want what's rightfully mine." The line went quiet. I could hear her breathing, shaky. "Your sister's upset." "I'm sure she is," I said softly. On day 4 my sister called. I let it ring twice before picking up. Her tone was sharp, forced. "Are you trying to sue us?" "No," I answered calmly. "I'm asking for a legal transfer of what I already own. There's a difference." "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You're overreacting." "I'm not overreacting," I interrupted, my voice steady. "I'm finally reacting." She sputtered something and hung up. That was the first real crack. On day 5, the contractor truck didn't show up. The house renovation plans came to a halt because the payment for the next phase hadn't cleared. My sister had been relying on joint family funds to finish the upgrades. Those funds? I'd legally frozen them through Mr. Reynolds' advice. Quiet. Efficient. Donna, my neighbor from across the street, called me that afternoon. "Something's going on at your old place," she said in a low voice. "They're yelling about some bank notice. Thought you should know." I smiled into my tea. "Thanks, Donna." Each day brought a new fracture. Day 6. A family group message popped up. My sister wrote a long paragraph about family betrayal, and "how could you do this?" followed by Mom's weak attempt to mediate. I replied with a single sentence. "Please have your lawyer contact Mr. Reynolds if you have concerns." Day 7. Mom showed up at my apartment. She knocked softly, holding a Tupperware of soup like old times. The smell of chicken broth filled the doorway when I opened it. Her face looked tired. "Felicia," she began, "this is tearing us apart." I stepped aside, letting her in. She perched on the edge of my couch like she wasn't sure she belonged there. "Your sister is frantic," she said. "The bank accounts, the contractors, everyone's calling." "I'm not doing anything outside the law," I said gently. "Everything I've put into that house is documented. I'm just collecting." She looked down at her hands. "I never thought you'd actually," she trailed off. She didn't finish the sentence. "You didn't have to." She'd never thought I'd stand up to them. "I gave that house 15 years, I said quietly. "Every dime I earned went into keeping it standing. And they gave me the guest room." Her eyes filled with tears, but not entirely for me. There was guilt, yes, but also confusion. She'd always assumed I'd accept whatever space I was given. She left after an hour, soup untouched. Day 8 brought a different kind of crack. A neighbor posted a question on the community Facebook group about why contractors weren't being paid on time. Someone else chimed in that they'd heard financial trouble at the house. Word spreads fast in quiet neighborhoods. My sister texted me furiously. "You're ruining everything. People are talking." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "I'm not ruining anything. I'm just not saving it for you anymore." I hit send and turned off my phone. By day 10 the scream came. Not in person. Through the phone. I was sitting at my kitchen table sorting through tax records when my cell rang. It was my sister. I answered, expecting another outburst. What I got instead was raw disbelief. "Wait, Felicia paid for everything?" she shouted, not even realizing she was on speaker. Someone else in the background, probably Mom, shushed her. I stayed silent, letting the weight of her words fill the space. All those years she'd treated the house like a stage for her performance. She'd never checked who kept the lights on behind the curtain. I hung up without responding. It wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. Over the next few days the house grew quieter from the outside. The trucks didn't come back. The neighbors stopped stopping by. My sister's car sat in the driveway longer, her social media posts fewer. Their kingdom wasn't collapsing in a blaze. It was cracking slowly, inevitably, under the weight of the truth. One evening I drove past again, slower this time. The porch light flickered weakly. A pile of unopened mail sat near the front door. My sister stood by the window, phone pressed to her ear, pacing like a trapped animal. She still hadn't realized. The foundation she stood on wasn't hers. It never had been. I didn't roll down the window. I didn't wave. I just kept driving. The cracks were widening. And I wasn't done. The image of my sister pacing by that flickering porch light stayed with me all night. She looked like someone who'd built her castle on sand and finally felt the tide coming in. I sat at my kitchen table with the window cracked open, the sound of distant traffic mixing with the rustle of autumn leaves outside. The air smelled faintly of rain. My hands rested on the stack of legal documents spread before me, neat, precise, undeniable. This wasn't about revenge in the loud, dramatic sense. It was about pressure. Applied quietly, consistently, turning the screws one by one until their false confidence buckled under the weight of reality. The first move came early the next morning. I drove downtown, parked in front of the bank, and walked inside with the kind of calm that unnerves people. The marble floors clicked beneath my shoes as I headed straight for the mortgage services desk. The clerk recognized my name. Apparently, long-term financial contributors don't get forgotten easily, even when families try to erase them. I'd like to review the shared accounts and service connections tied to my name, I said. Within minutes, I was sitting in a private office with a polite young woman who laid out folders and digital files for me to examine. She explained that several household utilities, the property insurance, and a small joint maintenance account were still under my authorization. They'd assumed, of course, that I'd just keep paying them out of habit. I smiled faintly. Let's update some authorizations, I said. By the time I left the bank, the utilities were scheduled for termination at the end of the billing cycle unless someone else took over. The insurance policy notifications would now go directly to me, not the house address. And that small maintenance account, the one they'd been dipping into for years without a second thought, was frozen. Not permanently. Just until ownership clarification was complete. Perfectly legal. Perfectly clean. As I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the cold air hit my face. I zipped up my jacket and allowed myself one small, satisfied breath. It wasn't about cutting them off abruptly. It was about making sure every support beam they'd relied on without acknowledgement started to creak. Later that day, my phone buzzed repeatedly. Missed calls from Mom. A string of texts from my sister. Sister. Why is the water company calling me? Sister. Did you change something? Mom. Felicia, what's going on with the insurance? They sent a letter here. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I poured myself a cup of tea, the steam curling upward in the fading afternoon light. Let them sit with it. Let the quiet do its work. Around 6 p.m. there was a knock at my apartment door. Not soft, but my sister. I opened it just enough to lean against the frame, blocking the entrance. Her hair was tied in a messy bun, her expression tight. She wasn't smiling now. What are you doing? She demanded. Good evening to you too, I replied calmly. The utilities. The insurance. The accounts. Are you seriously trying to make us miserable? I tilted my head slightly. I'm not trying. I'm simply reclaiming what's in my name. You've had the luxury of forgetting that. I'm just reminding you. She crossed her arms, her voice rising. You can't just pull everything like this. I can, I said quietly. And I have. For a moment neither of us spoke. The hallway light above flickered, casting a shadow across her face. Her confidence faltered. You're going too far, she said finally, her voice cracking just a little. No, I answered softly. I'm going exactly far enough. She left without slamming the door. That, more than anything, told me she was scared. 2 days later, the neighborhood group chat lit up again. This time, someone mentioned that the house's lawn maintenance crew hadn't been paid. Someone else chimed in about the lights going out during the evening. Quiet whispers, digital and real, were starting to circulate. People didn't know the details, but they smelled weakness. In neighborhoods like ours, that scent traveled fast. I wasn't reckless. Every move was deliberate. I met with Mr. Reynolds again to ensure every action fell neatly within legal lines. He reviewed my steps and nodded. They're cornering themselves, he said. You're just removing the cushions. That evening Mom called. Not pleading this time. Agree. Felicia, this has gone far enough, she barked as soon as I picked up. Your sister's stressed. The house is a mess. People are talking. I sat back in my chair looking at the city lights outside my window. The house is fine, Mom. It's just running on reality now. No invisible support. She sighed, her voice softening. You've made your point. Stop this before it gets worse. I didn't answer right away. The silence stretched until she whispered, almost as if to herself, I didn't think you had it in you. I always did, I said gently. You just never noticed. She hung up without saying goodbye. Over the next week the pressure built. Letters from utility companies piled up at the house. Contractors refused to return until payments cleared. My sister's perfectly curated life began to fray at the edges. She stopped posting pictures of home renovations online. Her car stayed in the driveway more often. She was running out of easy fixes. Then came the unexpected visit. A neighbor, an older gentleman named Frank, knocked on my apartment door one afternoon. I'd known him for years. He cleared his throat awkwardly. I don't mean to pry, Felicia, but everything okay over there? I raised an eyebrow. Why do you ask? Well, he shifted his weight. Your sister's been asking around for short-term loans to keep some contractors on schedule. Says there's some technical issue with the accounts. But you know how folks talk. I smiled politely. Thank you for letting me know, Frank. Everything's under control. He nodded slowly, sensing more beneath the surface but too respectful to push. As he left, I closed the door and leaned against it, the weight of his words settling in. She was scrambling. Quietly, desperately, and now publicly. That night I wrote out a list. Not of what I wanted next, but of what remained that they still took for granted. The list wasn't long anymore. The screws had been turned on nearly every bolt that held their illusion together. All that was left was time. One evening I received a text from my sister. No accusations this time. Just 5 words. Can we talk? Just us. I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part recognized the significance. She was breaking her usual pattern. No arrogance, no smirks, just uncertainty. I agreed to meet her the next day at a small cafe in town. When she walked in, she wasn't wearing her usual confident armor. No sunglasses, no forced laugh. Just tired eyes. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly as she sat down. I took a sip of my coffee. "Because you made it clear I didn't belong there. So I made sure you understood exactly what my presence had been worth." She rubbed her temples. "I didn't think you'd actually go through with it." "I know," I replied. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You've proven your point. Now what? Are you trying to take everything?" I didn't answer her directly. Instead, I watched her face as the silence stretched between us. She shifted uncomfortably. She still didn't understand that this wasn't about a single room. It was about years of quiet contributions dismissed like background noise. The conversation ended without resolution. But I left knowing something had changed. Her confidence wasn't cracked anymore. It was dented, misshapen, unsure. Back at my apartment that night, I looked over the paperwork one last time. The deadlines were approaching. Legally, financially, emotionally, the structure was groaning under the pressure. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't begging. I was simply tightening everything they'd loosened through neglect. The screws were turning. And they were beginning to feel it. I closed the folder and set it on the kitchen table, the last piece of paper slipping neatly into place. The city outside was quiet, washed in the soft glow of early morning. My tea had gone cold hours ago, but I didn't care. Everything was ready. At exactly 9 a.m. Mr. Reynolds called. "They've missed every deadline," he said. His voice was calm, measured. "No payment. No transfer. No negotiation. Are you ready to proceed?" I pressed the phone to my ear, staring out at the street below. A small group of children passed by in puffy jackets, their laughter echoing faintly up to my window. Life outside was moving on as usual. But inside, a line was about to be drawn that couldn't be erased. "Yes," I said simply. The legal wheels that had been quietly spinning for weeks now locked into their final position. The formal claim went through. Their kingdom was no longer theirs. It was shifting, legally and irrevocably, onto the foundation I had built. By the afternoon, the first letter arrived at the house. I didn't need to be there to see it. Donna sent me a picture. A thick white envelope with the firm's embossed logo, tucked neatly into the mailbox. My sister must have seen it first. Within an hour my phone buzzed. "Sister, what did you do?" I didn't reply. Then came Mom's call. Her voice trembled. "Felicia, it's happening, isn't it?" "Yes," I said softly. "It's happening." The official hearing was set for a Friday morning. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no courtroom theatrics. Just a quiet, administrative proceeding to finalize the ownership transfer of a property whose financial backbone had always been mine. I dressed simply that day. A dark wool coat. My hair pinned back. As I walked through the courthouse doors, the sound of my shoes on the polished floor echoed in my chest. My heart beat steadily, not fast, not nervous, just sure. They were already there when I arrived. My sister in a fitted blazer that couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. Mom beside her, hands clasped tightly in her lap. For a moment neither of them spoke. The silence was thicker than any argument we'd ever had. Mr. Reynolds sat beside me, his papers stacked neatly, every tab and sticky note in place. When the clerk called the case number, everything became oddly still. The hearing itself was straightforward. The evidence was overwhelming. Years of payments, repairs, taxes, insurance. Every line led back to me. My sister tried to interject once, claiming family understanding and verbal agreements, but the judge cut her off gently. "Do you have documented evidence?" the judge asked. She faltered. "No, but—" "Then it's irrelevant," the judge said simply. Mom stared down at her hands the whole time. She didn't defend me. She didn't defend my sister either. She just sat between us, shoulders hunched like someone watching a wall she thought would stand forever quietly crumble. It took less than an hour. One signature from the judge. One from me. And the house that had quietly absorbed my sacrifices for years, now officially legally bore my name. I walked out of that building with a manila envelope under my arm. The autumn wind tugged at my coat, swirling a few dry leaves across the steps. My sister hurried after me. "You can't just," she started, her voice shaking. I turned to face her. "I didn't just do anything," I said calmly. "I built it. You pretended it was yours. Now reality has caught up." She opened her mouth but nothing came out. For once there was no smirk, no clever comeback. Just stunned silence. Mom caught up a moment later, placing a trembling hand on my arm. "Felicia, please." I met her eyes. "I asked for fairness. I gave you chances. This isn't sudden. This is 15 years late." She didn't argue. She just lowered her hand slowly. The day the new deed arrived, I drove back to the house. Not to gloat. To claim what was already mine. The sun was low, casting a honey-colored glow across the street. The porch light flickered weakly like it always did when the bulb was about to die. I walked up the steps slowly, the wooden boards creaking under my feet. The same boards I'd paid to replace after a storm 10 years ago. My sister was on the porch, arms wrapped around herself. She didn't speak when she saw the envelope in my hand. She already knew. Inside, the house smelled faintly of old wood and dust. The renovations had stalled weeks ago. Half-rolled carpet sat untouched in the hallway, boxes of tiles stacked in the dining room. The place looked tired. Exposed. I stood in the living room and looked up at the chandelier. The light caught on the crystals just right, scattering soft reflections across the walls. For years I'd stared at that chandelier with quiet pride, and later quiet pain. Now it just felt like a witness. Mr. Reynolds met me there to finalize the notice delivery. My sister stood by the staircase, watching as he handed her the official 30-day notice. Not a forced eviction. A legal, structured transition. I wasn't cruel. I just wasn't invisible anymore. She skimmed the paper with trembling hands. "You're really going through with this," she whispered. "I already did," I said gently. Mom appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Where will we go?" she asked quietly. I turned toward her. "There are options. But this house, it's mine now. The papers say it. The history says it. I say it." Her eyes welled, but she didn't argue. She nodded slowly, as if some part of her had known this was coming all along. Over the next few weeks, I visited the house frequently, not as the quiet daughter standing in the corner but as the owner. Contractors returned. Utilities were transferred properly. The house began to hum with a different energy. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. My sister avoided me during those visits. The few times our paths crossed, her words were clipped, her pride bruised but intact. She'd learned something the hard way. Power built on assumption crumbles fast when met with quiet evidence. One afternoon, I stood alone in the living room with the new deed framed in my hands. Sunlight streamed through the front windows, warm against my face. I traced my finger over my name at the top of the document. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about remembering. Remembering every bill, every late night, every sacrifice that had built these walls. Donna came by that evening. She leaned on the porch railing watching the contractors work. "You did it," she said softly. "I did," I answered. "They didn't see it coming." "They never looked," I said. On the final day of their notice period, my sister and Mom moved out quietly. No dramatic goodbyes. Just boxes, a rental truck, and a silence that stretched between us like an unspoken history. She walked past me on the porch, carrying a box labeled bedroom. He paused, looked at me once, really looked. There was no anger left. Just a dull realization that everything had changed. I didn't gloat. I didn't stop her. I simply stepped aside and let the moment pass. When the truck drove away, I stood in the doorway and watched the taillights disappear around the corner. The house was still and silent again. But this silence was different. It wasn't neglect. It was mine. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me and leaned against it. The late afternoon light filtered through the windows, turning the floor golden. For the first time in years I felt no weight pressing down on my chest. Just steady, quiet ownership. I walked to the center of the living room beneath the chandelier. The crystals swayed slightly in the air from the closing door, scattering light across the walls. My name was on the deed. My presence filled the space. And every corner whispered the same truth. I hadn't taken something from them. I'd finally taken back what was always mine. And with that I turned the lights on. For once they stayed bright. If this story gave you chills, subscribe for more emotional dark revenge stories that remind us, quiet doesn't mean powerless.